Hey everybody, Lord Tremendous here. Got another Tremendous's Tall Tales for you. Session 3, Escort to Archway Forest. This one is really good. A lot of fighting, a lot of intrigue, a lot of stuff that, well, you're not going to want to miss, let me tell you that. So sit back, relax, and get ready to listen to the sultry sounds of my voice as we take you through yet another Tremendous Tall Tale.
Assemble the army!
As many of you D&Ders know, or just, anybody who has common sense knows, not every player character in the session is going to be able to make it to every single session. So, before every session, we will introduce you to the group for that particular session. Because I like saying the word session. No, because that way you know who to expect and any newcomers or anything like that, and to see whether or not your favorite character is part of this one or not. So, without further ado, let's meet them. First and foremost, we have our level 2 Dark Elf Cleric, Aben Darksun. You guys know him, you love him. He's been in every session so far. His kill count is still 4, he's never had an injury, and his achievements are Blacksmith Scammer, when he got a hold of Melissa in Session 2. If you haven't seen Session 1 and 2, why are you watching Session 3? Go watch Session 1 and 2 first, then come back and see this one, and you'll understand the achievement. But yes, he makes another appearance in this session. And he's awesome! Next up is our level 2 Khorne Paladin, Zarktis Darklorn. His kill count is 18. He's got no injuries. As an achievement is that he killed Battlecat. And if you can't remember why that's a big deal, go rewatch Session 1. It's totally worth it. It's a very big deal. But he's in this session as well, and I know he's a fan favorite. So everybody sit back and relax and get ready to see how he kicks some serious ass in this one. Another oldie but goodie is our level 2 Savage Orc Barbarian, Boss Gold Tusk. His kill count is also 4, he's never had an injury, and he was the one that killed Berserk, which was an old namesake heroic Khorne character that I used to run. What a jerk, huh? No, actually Berserk was trying to kill him, so it was good that he killed him. But yep, he's back in this one, and he's a huge part of this session too, so I hope you like him, because there's lots of him.
The Almighty says this must be a fashionable fight. It's drawn the finest people.
Also returning is another veteran of the sessions, and I say that because, there's been 3. But our level 1 human empire artificer, Marwyn Falric. He still has 0 kills, he's never had an injury, and he doesn't have any achievements yet, but don't hold that against him. He hasn't had a real chance to shine. But it's coming up soon, I promise you that one, and he's definitely a big part of this one, so get ready to see what he's up to in this session. And our last member for this session is a new member, a level 1 Skaven, and we use the halfling rules in order to make him work. Warplock Engineer, or a wizard is how we have it working in this one. His name is Squeaky Clean, and he's gotten 0 kills, 0 injuries, and no achievements because it's his first session. He hasn't had a chance to do anything yet. But yes, we have added a Skaven to the group now, so that's pretty intense. It's awesome to have a little rodent running around with the group, and I hope you guys are as excited as I am to show him, because he really is fun. And here is Squeaky's background, so you know where he's coming from. Squeaky Clean was self-exiled from his clan long ago, something to do with an explosion that decimated much of his tribe's population of slaves. Quite the simple misunderstanding. Sure, he had been targeting the slave pens with a spell he had no business casting, but it wasn't his fault. The pound of warpstone he had ingested made him have the strangest thoughts. After he awoke from the explosion, he saw the carnage and knew no one would understand, and would probably blame him for the dead slaves. Never one to be brave, Squeaky made his way to the surface and fled on foot into the open lands. For weeks he wandered the surface world, battling agoraphobia with every step. Eventually he got over his fear and began to explore and experiment in the environment he found himself in. It wasn't long before he was picked up by a marauding group of beastmen on their way to attack a high elf outpost on the outskirts of the beastmen's forests. The battle was intense as it was quick. Squeaky didn't see most of it. The first arrow that zipped past him had the Skaven fleeing for his life, which was the only reason he survived the battle at all. In his haste to escape, Squeaky failed to see the young elven lord chasing him. As the lithe elf caught up to him, Squeaky fell to his knees and begged for mercy. His request was met with something hitting his head very hard, a moment of pain, and then blissful unconsciousness. Squeaky awoke in a cage. He was not pleased, but his head hurt far too much for him to do anything about it other than gnaw at the bars. The young elf noble that he had encountered just before being put into the cage was nearby and approached him the moment he noticed him trying to escape. The elf had a deal for Squeaky, and the terms were not in his favor. It seemed that the elf lord had a son that had always wanted a Skaven for a pet. The elf lord explained his son was always a bit extravagant with his desires, but he could deny him nothing. The deal was twofold. Squeaky Clean would act as the elf lord's son's pet, and would protect him and serve him like any loyal pet would. In return, the Skaven would be fed, clothed, and allowed to live until such time as the elf lord's son either grew tired of him or Squeaky died. If he denied the elf lord's offer, he would be thrown, still inside the cage, into a bonfire. Not seeing any other choice, Squeaky agreed to the elf lord's terms. It was then an elven maid walked up from behind him and plucked a hair from his head. Casting a spell Squeaky recognized as an enchantment, he felt the power of the elven mage course through him. The spell left him breathing hard and weakened. The elf lord reached inside the cage and lifted up Squeaky's face to face him. "So that you don't go back on your word, rodent," was all the Lord said. Alright guys, real quick just before we begin, this game is designed with adult themes in mind. It's going to have adult language, adult themes, situations, general adult stuff. This is a mature 18 plus kind of campaign. It's not like my battle reports where, you know, I like to try to keep it PG, PG-13. This is rated R in the most extreme way. Not X, but definitely R. So if you shouldn't be watching this, if you're, you know, too young, you know you're not supposed to be looking at this, turn it off. Go watch a battle report. Go do something else. This ain't for you. Or, you know, at least get your parents' permission, something like that. There is all sorts of bad stuff. Bad language, gore, torture. It's not for kids. So if you're watching this with your kids and you don't want them to hear this kind of stuff, or, you know, with the language or whatnot, then now's the time to, you know, pause it and go put them in front of the Xbox or something. You know what I mean? If not, hey, sit back, relax, and get ready to listen to the sultry tones of my voice as we guide you through Session 3. The next morning, Zarktis, Abon, Marwyn, and Goldtusk gathered their belongings and set out to meet the elven lord they signed on to protect. Of Thump Thump, there was no sign. When asked about his absence, Goldtusk simply shrugged. "Orc go where orc go," was all he said. Having neither the time nor the interest, the allies decided not to search for him and be about their business. Riding their new mounts, the allies were a motley crew. Zarktis was on his warhorse, Abon was on his strider, Goldtusk rode his one-eyed boar, and Marwyn made do with the nag meant for the dwarf. Goldtusk had broken the will of his boar the night he spent with the animal in the stable. However, how he steered the beast was something so unique Marwyn couldn't stop staring. Goldtusk had thrust his thumb into the empty eye socket of the boar and used it to steer the animal as he rode it. Strangely enough, the boar didn't seem to mind this, and the two rode along rather calmly. They arrived in front of the king's repose just as the sun fully rose. Zarktis and Abon dismounted. Holding up his gauntleted fist, Zarktis spoke. "Abon and I will meet the elf. You two stay out here and mind the animals," he said. It wasn't a request. Nodding their assent, Goldtusk and Marwyn watched as Zarktis and Abon went inside. The inn was still fairly quiet at this hour, as most of the well-to-do and noble guests were still waking. However, sitting at a table near the fire was a well-armored elf that exuded nobility. Zarktis found his disgust hard to swallow. Dedicated to purpose, however, he introduced himself to the elf lord. "Elf, I am Zarktis, leader of the mercenary group that was hired to bring you to the Archway forest," he said. The elf lord looked up from his breakfast of fruit. Zarktis watched him with rising hatred as the elf lord assessed him with his slanted brown eyes. When a look of disappointment flashed across the elf's face, Zarktis' hand dropped to his weapon. If the lord noticed, he gave no indication. Rising fluidly from the table, the elf lord was easily as tall as Zarktis. However, where Zarktis was large and strong as an ox, the elf lord was lithe and seemed to be more of an intellect rather than a fighter. "Is it just you and the dark elf, then?" the elf lord asked, disdain heavy in his voice. Zarktis growled, "I have 2 more waiting for us outside." Again, the elf lord barely seemed to realize how angry Zarktis was becoming. "4 of you, is there? That will have to do, I suppose," he said, the same disdain dripping from his words. "I hope you know how to use that weapon, brute," the elf lord said, motioning at the sword sheathed at Zarktis' side. "My son and I must reach the Archway forest by the end of the week, or you will not be paid. I hope your human intellect can comprehend that." Zarktis had had enough and began to draw his blade. Stepping forward quickly, Abon stepped between the two. As he did so, he placed a hand on Zarktis' sword hand, stopping the blade from coming out fully. "We're more than competent, or we wouldn't have been offered the contract, my lord," Abon said as respectfully as he could. He wanted nothing more than to watch Zarktis rip this pompous elf into pieces, but he knew if he did, they would have to flee Prague and lose not only the blacksmith, but the gold in the bank as well. Trying to smile, Abon continued, "When will you be ready to depart?" Now the elf lord did sneer. "Do not presume to speak to me, dark elf. I do not banter with the likes of you," the elf lord yelled. "I will speak only to the leader of this mercenary group. Only! For I am the highborn Lord Elethian Highborn of Uthwan, one of the finest archmages my people have ever birthed. Do not presume to speak to me again." As Elethian finished his tirade, lightning crackled from his eyes and the room began to darken. Swallowing his sharp retort, Abon backed away slowly, but refused to bow or show weakness. He promised himself one day he would see this man, and his son, attached to his agony machine. Zarktis, who'd now had sufficient time to get control of his rage, once again spoke. "Lord Hightower, my group is ready to leave. Do you have horses for the journey?" Elethian spoke to Zarktis, but his gaze never left Abon's. "My son and I will ride in our wagon. Meet us out front, ready to depart in 15 minutes. Do not be late," he said. Without another word, Elethian turned his back on them and walked to the stairs. Not trusting themselves to speak, both Abon and Zarktis walked outside. Marwyn and Goldtusk were waiting right where Abon and Zarktis had left them when the two returned from the inn. Marwyn, not sensing the fury radiating off of Zarktis, merely asked a question. "Did you find him?" Abon shot a look at Marwyn so hateful that he blanched. It was Zarktis that replied. "Yes, he will be here in 15 minutes. The plan is to get the fool and his ilk to the Archway Forest and leave him there. We will not guard him a moment longer than we have to," he half spat. Marwyn nodded, still shaken by the look Abon gave him. Goldtusk noticed none of this and voiced his own question. "What Archway Forest?" Marwyn, glad for the distraction, replied. You see, Goldtusk, Archway Forest isn't a natural forest in a normal sense. I mean, it's natural, sure, but the forest was crafted by the mages that walked the world after the Cataclysm Wars, he said. Goldtusk, who felt a good tale coming, sat down cross-legged next to his boar and put an arm around the animal. Smiling at this, Marwyn continued. Legend has it that two of the life mages fell in love during their travels and wanted to be married. Since the world was still largely ravaged by the Cataclysm War against the demons, there was no suitable places for such a ceremony to be held. The life mages found the remnants of a forest and used their magic to revive it. Goldtusk leaned in close. He was enjoying the story. Even Zarktis and Abon were sitting on their mounts pretending not to listen. Marwyn, truly enjoying his growing audience, continued with gusto. The two lovers decided that this budding forest would be the perfect place for them to take their vows of love. They rallied the rest of the wizards with them to their cause. With hundreds of mages working together, they revived the forest and shaped it into a truly awesome wonder of the world, Marwyn said with his arms raised over his head. Random people that were walking by stopped to listen to Marwyn tell his story. The front lawn of the inn was quickly filling with people. Goldtusk, annoyed by the pauses, motioned for Marwyn to continue. It took 5 years for the mages to shape the entire forest to their needs. The trees grew tall and large, each tree bending in an arch that leads into the heart of the forest. There, the mages grew bushes into seats that encircle a large natural altar where the two love-struck mages would swear their vows of eternal love. It is said the forest is infused with the power of devotion, and any oath of love spoken inside the border of the forest can never be broken. Marwyn said this as he paced around the crowd of people now watching him. Women were swooning and men were rolling their eyes. Marwyn was loving it. After the forest was complete, the lovers swore their vows and their marriage was complete. The legends say even the animals celebrated their union. The celebration lasted for a full year, which is why some of the trees have had rooms carved into them that people still use to this day. It was after his last statement that Marwyn began to grow somber. For the next generation, anyone who wished to be married traveled to this sacred forest. Countless marriages were held there, and not one ended in infidelity. Marwyn smiled at a group of women who warmly smiled back. But it was not to last, he said, the tone of sorrow thickening in his voice. Over the decades, the elves began to deter people from getting married there. No one knows for certain why they began doing this, but some say it's because they feel that it's their forest and no other race deserves to be wed there. There was grumbling from the crowd now, and a few of the women began to weep. Marwyn continued. Now the forest is only used by nobility. Elves still come and go as they please, but the other races must be armed for war, or of noble birth to be allowed entrance. It is sad, but that is the world we live in. And that is where we must go. As Marwyn finished, he bowed deeply. No one made a sound. The people that had gathered were all lost in their own thoughts. Until Goldtusk jumped up and began cheering. Woo! Yeah! Good tale! Good tale! He bellowed at Marwyn. Tell more, Human! He encouraged. At Goldtusk's abrupt praise, the rest of the crowd began cheering as well, and some even joined Goldtusk prodding for another story. Marwyn, completely forgetting why he was here in the first place, began to tell another story. Well, I do know a story about a Tzeentch demon prince and a gauntlet of dark elf bolt throwers, he said. It was just as he began to tell this tale that Lord Hightower's wagon came around the corner and pulled up next to the allies. The wagon was a massive wooden structure pulled by 2 elven war steeds and driven by a younger elf, more than likely some sort of squire. The driver looked down at Zarktus and spoke. His Nobleness Lord Hightower wishes to depart immediately. You are hereby ordered to begin your march, Zarktus, the pompous elf said. Zarktus grabbed the scrawny elf by his silk shirt, yanked him towards his face. Talk to me like that again, and Lord Hightower will walk because his driver is dead, he hissed. Shoving the man back into the seat, Zarktus took position to the side of the wagon. Goldtusk, Marwyn, and Avon followed suit. Avon and Goldtusk did nothing to hide their laughing. The driver, for his part, was able to keep his composure but said nothing else. Without another word, the allies escorted the wagon outside the city and began their long journey east towards the fabled Archway forest. The first day of the journey passed without incident. Avon and Zarktus controlled their need for vengeance on the Elf Lord. Goldtusk spent most of his time riding behind a wagon where it kicked up dirt and mud and kept him cool, and Marwyn just enjoyed being a part of the group again. As the sun began to set, Zarktus rode up to the wagon and knocked on the side. After a moment, a seamless slot, no larger than the width of an elf's hand, slid open. Zarktus could see the eyes of Lord Hightower glaring at him. What are you bothering me for? You are the hired help, not my traveling companion, Elethian spat. Zarktus swallowed his retort. Lord Hightower, The sun is setting. We are going to stop for the night, was all he trusted himself to say. Alethian looked towards the sun, and his eyes narrowed. The sun won't set for another hour. Do not play games with me, human. March till the sun touches the horizon. Then we will make camp, he ordered. Before Zarktis could reply, the door slid shut. Zarktis punched a tree as they rode past it and took a melon-sized chunk out of it. It did little to soothe his rage. Zarktis allowed the wagon to travel for another 30 minutes when he spotted the perfect camping spot. Riding up to the driver, Zarktis allowed his rage to seep into his voice. Stop the wagon in that clearing, he snarled. The wagon driver balked. But Lord Hightower, my lord. Zarktis rounded on the coward. Lord Hightower won't save you from my blade. Head for the clearing now! Without another word of protest, the wagon driver left the road and made for the clearing. Upon stopping in the clearing, the allies dismounted. All of them groaned and stretched. Marwyn began making a campfire while Aebon and Goldtusk took care of the mounts. Zarktis found firewood by venting his frustration on a nearby tree. Hacking it to pieces with his axe, the axe did not slake his anger, but it made him manageable again. He no longer felt like he was going to crush the skull of a pompous elf lord tonight. The allies sat around the fire and divvied up the night's watch. The sound of a hatch opening in the wagon caught all of their attention.
Oh.
Poking his head out of the hatch was Alethian's son. He looked around for a moment and then saw the allies staring at him. Making eye contact with Aebon, the boy spoke. You there, Darkskin, he said, nodding his head towards Aebon. I require water. Bring some to me this instant. Aebon's hand went for his crossbow, and Zarktis' hand stopped him. We're hired to escort you to the forest, not fetch you water. Get it yourself, Zarktis yelled back. The young elf prince became enraged by this. How dare you speak to me in such a way, you short-lived tainted barbarian? I am Prince Pine Hightower of Uthwan. You should be grateful that I lowered myself to talk to one such as you, let alone allowed you to bring me water, you ignorant swine! The prince shouted. Tears were welling up in his eyes as the emotion filled him. Zarktis barked laughter. Careful, prince. Those tears of yours will stain your dress, he replied. Before the prince could give his retort, it looked like he was pulled back inside the wagon. After a few moments, something no one expected happened. A full-grown Skaven warplock crawled out of the hatch. The crossbow fell out of Aebon's hands at the shock. Zarktis, too, was speechless. Not because of the Skaven's appearance, but due to the fact that he hadn't even noticed Aebon escaping his grasp and leveling his crossbow at the wagon. The Skaven sniffed the air. Master wants water! Yes, yes! I get Master water! Yes! The Skaven said to the allies. With an agility only known to the rodent race, the Skaven hopped off the wagon and scurried into the forest. The elf prince's head popped out of the hatch again. Be quick, Squeaky! I need that water for my meal, he called after the rat. Turning around to look at the party, the prince gave them a condescending grin. See? I always know how to get what I want, even when I have to suffer with the likes of you, he taunted. Getting in the last word, the prince's head ducked back into the wagon and the hatch snapped shut. The party sat motionless around the fire. It's been a long time since I've wanted to kill a child, Aebon muttered to no one in particular. It only took Squeaky a few minutes before he returned with 2 skins full of water. He also had a small collection of flowers on his belt that hadn't been there before he left. The party watched as the Skaven climbed easily to the top of the wagon and was let inside. Wonder what else in big roly box, Goldtusk said. He gazed at the wagon. His look was obvious. He wanted to loot it badly. Sighing, Goldtusk turned his attention back to the fire and to his meal. The rabbit they had caught was almost ready to eat. After dinner was done, the party took turns on watch throughout the night. Aebon had the second shift. As he finished up his meditation and prayers, he had the queerest sense that he was being watched. Looking around, he saw the silhouette of someone far in the distance, darting to the east. He decided to stay extra vigilant during his watch, just in case what he saw was a precursor to an attack. He didn't think it was, though. The thing he saw was easily 300 yards away, too far to be a threat. As it was, the rest of the night passed without incident. The next morning, Avon shared what he saw with Zarktis. They both agreed it was probably nothing, but stayed sharp during the rest of the day. Once, about an hour before they began looking for a place to stop for the night, Goldtusk spotted something far off in the distance. It looked large, but fast. He only saw it for a moment and couldn't be sure. The party investigated the best they could, but found nothing. The second sighting, though, put them all on edge. Zarktis deemed it was wise to inform the Elf Lord. Knocking on the wagon, Zarktis steeled himself against the Elf Lord's words. As the panel slid open, Zarktis spoke. "My lord, we have spotted someone in the distance twice now. Is there anyone that might not want you to make it to the Archway?" he asked. Elethian looked about ready to scold Zarktis again when a new look seemed to cut off his words cold. "Someone wanting to stop us?" he asked. The Elf Lord almost sounded nervous. "Of course not. Whatever you saw must be ordinary bandits," he said, his cordial nature a moment ago vanishing as quick as it appeared. "If you can't handle simple bandits, then what am I paying you for?" he spat. Zarktis did not reply immediately as he fought to control his temper. It was then that he got an assist from an unlikely source. Goldtusk has heard the exchange and now rode his boar up to the slot. "You no talk to friend like that, puny elf thing," Goldtusk growled. Elethian wasn't swayed. "Quiet, dog! I've already told the dark elf I wouldn't speak to anyone but," he began. Goldtusk, not one for backtalk, reared back and punched the wagon right where the elf's stomach should have been. The blow should have splintered the wood and rocked the wagon to its core, but the structure had been enchanted, and instead, Goldtusk's fist just left an impressive dent in the wood. Goldtusk locked eyes with Elethian. "Cage no protect you, elf. Learn respect, or learn pain." With his message sent, Goldtusk returned to his position behind the wagon. Zarktis allowed himself a very rare grin. Elethian waited until Goldtusk was gone before he spoke again. Zarktis was genuinely surprised to hear a slight bit more civility in his words. "What do you want me to do about this bandit situation, Zarktis?" he asked. It was the first time the Lord had called him by his name. "Nothing. I will kill anything that crosses our path. But any information or assistance you can provide would be useful," he said. Elethian seemed to ponder something for a moment. "I will lend you the aid of my son's pet. He's a natural scout," he said. Zarktis said nothing as the slot slid closed. A few moments later, the hatch on the wagon opened again, and out came Squeaky. Climbing out of the hatch, the Skaven Warplock engineer sat happily on the roof and began sniffing the area. Looking down at Zarktis, Squeaky grinned. "No danger, Chaos Thing. We good. Squeaky clean keep watch. Yes, he said. Shaking his head, Zarktis returned to his position on the left side of the wagon. By Khorne's breath, he couldn't wait for this journey to be over. As the day wore on, the party noticed that the grasslands became flat and the grass began to recede. By the time they stopped for camp, there were no trees around anymore and only dried grass. Small boulders began to appear around the road. It was a clear sign that the landscape was going to become barren very soon. Checking their provisions, the party split up the watches and bedded down for the night. It passed without incident. The next morning, the party got an early start and continued their trek east towards Archway Forest. As the day drew on, the air got drier as the landscape became sparser. There was no shade, and the sun was beating down on them unmercifully. The terrain became more and more dangerous as the rocks they encountered seemed to grow in size by the mile. By midday, the Allies found themselves surrounded by boulders, 10 feet tall. The road was no longer clear, and they had to take extra time to go around the obstructions. Their pace was a crawl, and the delays had everyone in a foul mood. As night came, it was Squeaky that noticed the odd smell. Chaos Thing! Chaos Thing! Yes! Bad scent! Bad! Make Fear Monk spray! Bad scent! To the northeast! You go check! Yes! He said frantically to Zarktis. Abon volunteered to scout the direction indicated by the Skaven. It did not take him long to find the remnants of a large campfire. Someone, or something, had made camp in this spot the night before and had burned a large animal's carcass. Abon determined that whoever it was had left hours ago towards the east. Although he couldn't find any footprints to back up that claim, it was his instincts that told him as much. Relaying his findings to Zarktis once again, he went to talk with Elethian. Taking a deep breath, Zarktis knocked on the wagon. The person that was behind the slot when it opened wasn't Alethian, though. It was Pine. Zarktis began to grind his teeth. "What gives you the right to disturb your betters, human?" Pine spat. Zarktis began feeling hot. "Get your father, child. I have no time for you." The prince wasn't listening. "Do not pretend to tell me what to do. If this was Uthwan, you'd already be dead. I am a prince, and you will address me as such," he said. There was so much unearned arrogance in his voice, Zarktis couldn't help himself. He began to draw his knife, with the intent of removing one of the prince's eyes. Just as he prepared to strike, the prince was removed from the slot, and Alethian took his place. Zarktis sheathed his knife. "What is wrong now, Zarktis?" he asked. "We found a camp in the area. Someone camped there last night and left only hours ago. We are running behind and need you to abandon this wagon. Get on the horses pulling it so that we can get you to the forest in time." Alethian shook his head. "We cannot leave the wagon. It is your job to get us there, wagon and all. Fail to do so, and you will not get paid. Also, I will see to it that you lose your mercenary license and never get to work in Prague again." Zarktis argued. "Why do you need the wagon? If you abandon it, we can still get you to the forest. If not, we will be late." Alethian shook his head again. "It is too late to try and change the contract. Either get us to the forest, wagon and all, or you do not get paid. Make your decision, human." Alethian finished. He slid the slot closed hard. Zarktis ground his teeth as he made his way to Avon. After telling him what happened, Avon shrugged. "Screw them. Let's leave and go back to Prague. It's not like we need the money." Avon almost seemed bored with the conversation. Zarktis thought it over and shook his head. "If we fail in this mission and Alethian survives, we'll have real trouble in Prague. Let's just get him to the forest as fast as we can. If the wagon throws a wheel, oh well." Avon nodded his agreement. Zarktis approached the wagon's driver. "Move this crate! If you slow down for any reason other than my direct order, I will feed you to the orc. Understand?" Zarktis threatened. Shaking, the wagon driver tried to reply, but was only able to nod. Zarktis led the way around the rocks and was impressed that the wagon driver was able to keep up. Looking behind him, he saw the reason. Goldtusk was riding next to the wagon, staring at the driver while licking his lips. Grinning, Zarktis made a mental note not to kill the orc right away. He was proving very useful on this trip. By the time night fell, the allies were back on schedule. Splitting up the watches for the night, they bedded down. The night passed without incident. The next morning, the party set out early once again in order to keep up their pace. The rocks were getting bigger and closer, and they were only had a couple of days left to get to the forest. After a few hours, Squeaky began squeaking for the party to stop. Zarktis rode over to see what was wrong. "Bad scent! Bad scent! Fear! Fear! Danger, chaos thing!" Squeaky said. He pointed in the direction they were traveling. Zarktis could smell the fear rolling off the rat. The scent made him sick. Without hesitation, Zarktis continued bringing the party in the direction of the danger. He was hoping for a good fight. As they continued forward, the congestion of the rock pillars around them abruptly stopped. They found themselves entering a clearing 50 yards wide in any direction. There were still some large stone outcroppings inside the area, but compared to what they had been traversing, this was clear road. Zarktis also immediately recognized it as the perfect place for an ambush. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than he heard a deafening bellow come from the north. A lead belcher came around from behind one of the stone outcroppings and lit the fuse on the dwarven cannon he held in his meaty arms. He was about to charge the lead belcher when 3 more bellows filled the air, and 3 ogre iron guts came from the east, charging the wagon and the allies from their own places of concealment. Thrilled to his core at the potential fight, Zarktis jumped off his horse and bellowed his own war cry. "Blood for the blood god!" The ogres came at the allies faster than any of them would have thought possible. The way they were able to throw their weight around would have been inspiring had the group not been focusing on saving their lives. The first one to move was Avon. He quickly began to summon water over the Iron Gut's head in the hope that he could snuff out the fuse in his cannon before the terrifying weapon could discharge. His spell went off perfectly and it soaked the lead belcher. Unfortunately, it had no effect on the fuse, as the bulk of the ogre was able to shield it from the downpour. The few paltry drops that did touch the fuse weren't enough to extinguish it. Zarktus was next. He raced to meet one of the Iron Guts that were charging the wagon. Coming toe-to-toe with the monsters was exactly what he had been needing for over a week now. Almost gleefully, he swung his great axe into the body of his foe, ripping through flesh and muscle. The ogre roared in pain and began madly swinging his club at Zarktus. His blows were easy to avoid, but he knew that if the ogre got a lucky hit on him, it would mean his death. Squeaky Clean and Marwyn were on the move next, and they made their way up to the top of one of the stone outcroppings. It took time to climb up the steep cliffs, but both were able to make it without difficulty. While Squeaky began to prepare a spell, Marwyn pulled out his crossbow and took careful aim at the ogres assaulting his friends. Goldtusk was next, and he made his way towards an Iron Gut that wasn't engaged yet. Roaring his fury, he too was able to lodge his great axe into the meaty center of an Iron Gut, stopping its charge cold. The two then began their deadly dance, with Goldtusk also realizing that if the Iron Gut was able to hit him, even once, it would mean his grisly death. Avon watched in horror as the fuse to the lead belcher's cannon ran inside the barrel. The lead belcher was grinning widely as the cannon bellowed and released 20 pounds of shrapnel in their direction. The majority of the shot missed the allies or bounced harmlessly off their armor. The horses pulling the wagon and the driver were not as lucky. Critically hitting all three, the party watched as the horses exploded from the onslaught, leaving nothing more than gore-soaked dirt where the horses had once stood. The wagon driver, riddled with dozens of holes, limply fell from the wagon seat and died in the dirt. The wagon itself was only mildly burned by the debris. The final Iron Gut, the one that wasn't intercepted during its charge, slammed into the wagon at this point and hit the structure with all its might. A massive crack formed in the wagon where the ogre's club connected with it. The wagon bounced madly on its wheels, and the party could only imagine how the elves inside were faring. Not that they gave a care, they just knew if the elves didn't survive, they wouldn't get paid and fail their mission. Squeaky, seeing the damage done to the horses, locked eyes with the still grinning lead belcher and cast his befuddlement spell on him. For a moment it appeared that the lead belcher would be able to shake the spell off. Then a serene look of confusion washed over his face, and the cannon in his arms hung loose at his side. Seizing the opportunity, Abon and Marwyn loosed bolts into the ogre. They both hit and caused significant damage to the monster. Unfortunately, they failed to kill him, and the ogre continued to stare dumbly at the ground where the horses had once stood. Zarktus and Goldtusk fought their opponents with all the ferocity one had come to expect from the two warriors. Zarktus deflected the Iron Gut's blow with a casual shrug before burying his axe deep into the monster's head. The blow cleaved most of the skull from the ogre's head, and he fell limply to the ground. Goldtusk too was able to defeat his opponent, although it was the faith in his gods that saved him from a blow that would have pulverized him. His enemy had brought down his club with enough force to level a mountain. Goldtusk, being weighed down by his solid gold skeletal structure, couldn't avoid the blow. Instead, he stood his ground and allowed the ogre the chance to kill him. His faith in Gork's power, or possibly Mork, absolute. His faith was rewarded when the tattoos on his body flared brightly and deflected the killing blow. The ogre's club went a solid 2 feet into the dirt next to Goldtusk, and the ogre could do nothing but stare dumbly at him. Grinning, Goldtusk removed the Iron Gut's head from his shoulders and kicked the monster's body over. As one, Zarktus and Goldtusk bellowed their battle fury to their gods and charged their next opponent. Avon watched as Zarktus engaged the lead belcher that was still standing around stupidly. It was completely bewitched by Squeaky, which gave Avon pause. The Skaven might prove a valuable tool yet. Holstering his crossbow, he drew his longsword and prepared to engage the lead belcher Zarktus was charging. Darting in like an arrow, Avon slashed at the ogre's gut and thighs, creating rivers of blood that flowed down the stunned creature's legs. The pain of Avon's attack seemed to bring the ogre out of his daze, and he attacked Avon with renewed fury. Avon found dodging the fool's attacks to be child's play. Avon knew all he had to do was keep the ogre's attention long enough for Zarktus to land the killing blow. Grinning, Avon danced nimbly around the Leadbelcher, keeping his attention and turning his back towards the incoming Zarktis. Over at the wagon, the fight was going much differently. The Iron Gut attacking the wagon was better armored than his counterparts. Goldtusk tried desperately to get through the ogre's armor with his attacks, but no matter where he struck, it seemed the ogre's armor either absorbed his blows or deflected them completely. Marwyn saw this and became worried when the Iron Gut's blows continued to pummel the wagon. The cracks were beginning to crumble and deform. Marwyn knew the wagon couldn't take much more and devised a desperate plan. Dropping his crossbow, he backed up as far as he could on top of the outcropping he was on. Drawing his mace, he sprinted to the ledge and threw himself off his elevated shelf. Soaring through the air, Marwyn saw he had planned his flight perfectly. He came down like a meteor and connected solidly with the Iron Gut, his mace hitting the Iron Gut's gut plate and cracking it in multiple places. Unfortunately, the impact stunned Marwyn as well, and he fell crumpled into a heap after bouncing off the now wounded Iron Gut. Goldtusk had watched the entire event unfold before him. He stood now, in front of the Iron Gut that was bleeding heavily from the stomach, and stared at the Who-Man that had performed the incredible attack that had wounded the Iron Gut. For the Iron Gut's part, he shrugged off the pain and raised his club, slower this time, but brought it down onto the wagon with all the strength he could still muster. The club hit the damaged wagon solidly, and his final hit caused the wagon to explode outward, sending showers of wooden shrapnel in every direction. Goldtusk was pelted by the wagon pieces flinging through the air. He was knocked backwards and landed hard on his back, the wind knocked from his lungs. The Iron Gut was also knocked backwards from the unexpected explosion and momentarily stunned from the dozen of splinters that now jutted from his body. The exploding wagon caught Squeaky's attention. Squinting, he saw the prince and the lord amongst the wreckage. The lord looked unharmed, but laid perfectly still on his back. The prince looked near death, and was curled up in a pool of his own blood. Seeing his chance, Squeaky made his move. Crawling down from the pillar he was on, Squeaky quickly made his way towards the prone elves. Squeaky drew his tiny blade and stalked over to where the elf lord now lay. He saw the elf's eyes were open and aware. Nervous, he picked his way through the wreckage until he stood above Alethian. "Master, you dead?" he asked. Alethian's eyes glared at him. "Do not touch me!" he warned. Squeaky heard Alethian's words and interpreted them as fear. Reaching for Alethian's neck, Squeaky Clean's mouth began to salivate as the thought of getting revenge on the elf that had enslaved him to the prince for the last 10 years. When his stubby fingers touched the elf lord's throat, however, a powerful magical explosion detonated from Alethian's body and sent Squeaky flying backwards. His body bounced off the wreckage of the wagon and slammed into one of the rock outcroppings 15 feet away. There Squeaky laid, unconscious and bleeding from dozens of wounds. Goldtusk, furious at how quickly the battle had spiraled out of control, charged the last living Iron Gut. He drove his axe through the ogre's gut plate and severed his spine. Goldtusk bellowed his rage into the dying Iron Gut's face and then hacked at the ogre's body just to ensure the job was done. He then went to check on Marwyn. The Who-Man was brave. His death should come at the hands of an orc, not an unclean ogre. Kicking Marwyn's limp body over, Goldtusk checked his wounds. He determined Marwyn would live, and the knowledge made the orc glad. He will enjoy fighting the Who-Man to the death one day. To kill one as brave as Marwyn would be a glorious victory. Meanwhile, Zarktis and Abon were toying with the Leadbelcher. Bleeding from a dozen of deep wounds, the Leadbelcher was becoming pale. His attacks were sluggish, and they both knew the ogre wasn't going to be conscious much longer. Zarktis, bored of the game, walked contemptuously towards the Leadbelcher and caught its fist in his hand as the ogre made one last attempt on his life. With a snarl, Zarktis kicked the ogre in the chest, knocking him to his back. With a primal roar, Zarktis reared back and slammed his axe into the Leadbelcher's face. "Blood for the Blood God!" he screamed at the sky. Avon sighed and walked over to the wreckage of the wagon. With the battle over, Alethian rose to his feet and went over to check on his son. "Nobody touch him!" he ordered. No one challenged him on this. No one cared enough at the moment to argue. Marwyn came to with a start. Goldtusk was standing over him still and grinning widely. "You fight good, Who-Man. You, me, fight one day. Much glory had in killing you," Goldtusk said cheerily. Marwyn, His head aching, grimaced. "Thanks, Gold Tusk. Sounds good," he replied. He didn't fully understand what the orc meant, but didn't want to be rude. Aebon checked on the Skaven, who was still in a crumpled heap at the base of the outcropping. The Skaven's left eye was a ruined mess, and his body was bent in ways never intended. There was still some life in the rodent, so, never one to miss an opportunity, Aebon studied him, determined to watch this death unfold before him and become one step closer to fulfilling his quest for his god. As Aebon watched the life drain from Squeaky's body, a Lethean walked up and laid a hand on Aebon's shoulder. "Excuse me, please, Aebon. I must attend my son's pet." The respect in his voice caught Aebon off guard. He offered no resistance to Elethian's request. Working fast, Elethian placed Squeaky on his back and began channeling life magic into his body. Aebon watched in awe as Elethian's magic began to heal Squeaky and return life to his body. It was over in a matter of moments, and as Elethian finished, he rested next to Squeaky's body. Tearing a piece of cloth from his own robe, Elethian tied the strip of cloth around the Skaven's empty left eye socket. "I enslaved the Skaven as a pet for my son a decade ago. I always thought the beast hated me for that," Elethian said. Aebon decided to remain quiet. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew it required no words from him. He stood in respectful silence, curious to see how this event would play out. "When the wagon exploded, he tried to come to my aid. I told him not to touch me, but the creature, he still tried to help me, and my protective magic almost killed him." Aebon was surprised to hear sorrow slip into the elf lord's voice. Standing, Elethian turned to face the allies, all of whom had assembled around them and had watched the healing of Squeaky take place. Elethian looked at his son, who was now sitting up amongst the wreckage of their wagon, and wiped away a tear. "I owe you all an apology for my behavior over the last few days. I did not give you the respect you deserved, and I have no excuse for that." His voice cracked at one point, and he stopped to regain control of himself. "My son is very important to me. His protection and this marriage was all I could think about. Getting him to the Archway and completing the ceremony was everything." The shame in his face was plain to the allies. "Even after how awful my son and I were to you, all of you put your lives on the line to protect ours. Your honor is flawless, and I am shamed by my treatment of you." Bowing before the allies, Elethian continued, "I will never show any of you disrespect again. Thank you for my life, and for the life of my son. I am forever in your debt, my friends," Elethian finished. No one spoke for a while as they processed what just happened. It was Zarktis that finally moved forward and spoke. Setting a gauntleted hand on Elethian's shoulder, Zarktis locked eyes with the elf. "There is no dishonor in protecting your family. You apologize for your mistakes, which will do for now. It's over," he said sternly. Elethian nodded, some of his former steel returning to him. He stood tall once again. Zarktis was encouraged to see this. "Now let's salvage what we can and get moving. We still have to get you to the forest by tomorrow." Salvaging what they could took little time. There was some food and drink from the wagon, and the ogres had broken armor and weapons too big to use left on them. There was some gold that was quickly dispersed amongst the party, and a note written in a script none could decipher. The best the allies could determine is it was written by a woman. They kept the note secret from Elethian until they determined if they could truly trust him or not. Now that the wagon was destroyed and the horses drawing it were obliterated, the allies had to allow Pine, Elethian, and Squeaky to ride with them. Aebon allowed Pine to ride with him, Zarktis took Elethian on his horse, and Goldtusk picked up Squeaky's unconscious form and tied him to the back of his boar. Bruised, but far from beaten, the allies made their way east along the road. As the allies made their way east, the landscape began to become hilly again, and the green returned to the landscape. It was a relief to be done with the barren lands. Having to worry about another ambush the entire time wore on all of them. By the time the sun was setting, every member of the group was ready to dismount and rest. After a silent dinner and divvying up the night's watch, the night passed without incident. Mounting up, the group returned to their journey east. Aebon noticed that the prince was clutching him tightly as they rode and seemed to be shivering. This more than annoyed Aebon, but he decided to ignore it for now. Soon they would deliver these burdens and be done with this annoying mission. The group rode in silence, which suited their moods fine. By noon, they crested a hill and stopped to take in the full view of Archway Forest. "We have arrived," Zarktis said. As the party took in the sight and began to sigh in relief, the moment was shattered when an arrow just missed Avon's head as it whizzed past. Alarmed, the allies were taking up defensive positions when they saw a unit of high elven dragon princes charging out of the forest and heading straight at them. Alethian's fury returned. He dismounted without a word and positioned himself between the charging elven knights and the allies. Stretching his arms out to his sides, Alethian bellowed a warning to the incoming knights. "Enough! If you attack us, not one of you will survive this day!" His words echoed for long moments after he yelled them. The dragon princes continued to approach the allies, but their speed significantly decreased, and when they pulled up in front of the allies, their lances were no longer down, and their visors of their helms were up. A beautiful elven woman removed her helm as she reined her horse in. Shaking out her hair, the party all noticed the bow she wore on her back. Aban noted that she was the only member of the party of this unit that had a bow. He filed that information in the back of his mind. The arrow she shot at him would be addressed at a later time. For her part, the elven woman ignored the allies completely. "Alethian, you're almost late," she said with a sneer. Alethian met her sneer with one of his own. "Almost, but not actually. Is this how you greet your future family, Lady Blower?" Lady Blower spit at Alethian's reply. "You may become my family by marriage, but never by blood." The allies watched as her ire rose with every word. Lady Blower waved her hand towards the allies. "No blood family of mine would dare bring such rabble to a wedding. I scarcely believe you're truly noble born, Alethian." Alethian took a breath to retort when Zarktis motioned his mount forward. "If it wasn't for his choice and company, he never would have made it here. Mind your tongue before I rip it out of your head, elf," he growled at her. At Zarktis' words, the dragon princes lowered their visors. Zarktis laughed at them. "You're all a bit too close for lances." He was begging them to attack. For a tense moment, it looked like the allies were going to have to fight the elves. Neither side was willing to back down at first, and the hate between the two groups was palpable. It was Lady Blower that blinked first. Making a sound of disgust, she rounded her horse away from the allies and began to ride back towards the forest. "Corn warriors are such pig animals," she said under her breath as she rode off. Marwyn heard the words and called after her. "No, ma'am. The pig animal is the orc's mount." Marwyn felt bad that the elf woman didn't know the difference and was just trying to help. For the first time ever, everyone in the group laughed. The allies made their way to the borders of the Archway Forest. Each one of them could feel the magic in the trees, and it affected each of them differently. Zarktis was disgusted, Aban was intrigued, Goldtusk felt itchy, while Marwyn and Squeaky looked around in awe. No matter how the allies felt about this area, not one of them could deny the power emanating from the land. Alethian led the party to the main archway of the forest. The redwood trees that made up the archway were majestic, to say the least. The trees were lined up perfectly next to each other, and their branches shaped to form flawless arches high over their heads. The archways were large enough for a pair of dragons to walk under side by side, with room to spare. The natural seating that surrounded the trees put any coliseum to shame. The allies could easily see why nobility used this forest for weddings. It was large, pompous, and excessive. 3 traits anyone with power exuded. Elven retainers flocked to the group as they made their way down the main archway. "My Lord Hightower," an exceptionally pretty young elf greeted. "We were worried you wouldn't make it." She finished with a fluid curtsy. Alethian looked annoyed but acknowledged the elven maid with a nod. The elven maid's attention turned towards the prince. "Please follow us, betrothed. We must prepare you for the ceremony." Her words were silky, but Aban was sure there was a deeper meaning in them. He just didn't care enough to investigate. As the elven retainers escorted the prince away, Alethian turned to face Zarktis. "I'm afraid I must ask more of you, my friend. I hope I haven't disgusted you so much with my earlier behavior that you won't hear me out." There was a sadness in his voice now which intrigued Zarktis. "Make your request," Zarktis replied. "I do not trust the Blower family. I believe treachery flows through their veins, and this wedding must take place," he said, desperation replacing the earlier sorrow. Zarktis nodded. You want to hire us as guards for the wedding, then? He already knew the answer. Elithian nodded. Yes, if you'll do me the honor, I can pay you 1,500 gold if you'll stay on for the wedding. As if the talk of money reminded him, he handed Zarktis a large bag of gold. Here is the gold I owe you for getting me and my son here as you promised. Now, no matter what your choice is, at least you know I'm a lord of my word. Zarktis took the gold and put it in his pack. We will stay on as your guards, only until the wedding is complete. After the ceremony finishes, we leave. He didn't want to stay, but he knew having an elven lord as an ally might prove useful later on when he was ready to launch his own attack against the hated von Karsteins. Elithian was visibly relieved. Thank you, Zarktis, and to your allies. I thank the gods that our paths crossed when they did. He bowed as he said this to the allies. Zarktis simply nodded. The party was shown their rooms for the night, which were small but functional for their size. The rooms had been carved out of the trunks of the giant redwoods that lined the outside of the archways. Beds, shelves, and an indoor latrine were in each of the rooms. After the allies had settled in, they all met in the banquet hall for a feast. The banquet hall was amazing, easily as large as the main archway section, but instead of open space, there were solid oak tables and benches filling it. Food of every kind from every corner of the Warhammer world crowded the tables that groaned with the weight. The party had never eaten so well. No one was rude to the party during the feasting. In fact, the elves in attendance seemed intrigued by them. They were asked many questions and were given almost royal access to the tables thanks to their exotic natures. Goldtusk had a bit too much elven wine and ended up very drunk, and naked, while sitting at one of the feasting tables. Many of the elven maids vied for the attention of the naked savage orc. Goldtusk was oblivious to their desires, however. He cared only for the food and drink. Zarktis never left the side of Elithian. He ate just not to appear rude. Although the food tasted like ash to him, Chaos Warriors required no food or drink after devoting themselves to the true dark gods. But this was a job, and Zarktis knew he had to play the role. Zarktis and the elf lord talked some during the feast, but he could tell the lord was very distracted. During the night, Zarktis took his distraction as a warning sign not everything was how it appeared, and stayed extra vigilant during the event. Abon ended up in a conversation with an elf child. The young maid, barely 15 summers old, approached him shyly. Why is your skin so pale, yet you're called a dark elf? She asked sweetly. Avon couldn't help but to smile. Because the gods love wondrous variety. The teenager giggled at his response. The tales say that my people and yours hate each other, yet we're cousins. Is that correct? She asked, warming up to Avon. Avon nodded. This is true, but let me ask you something. Do you have a large family? The girl nodded. Brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts and uncles? The girl nodded again. Do you like all of them? The girl shook her head vigorously. Avon smiled. You see? No one gets along with everyone in their family. The girl grinned widely as what Avon said seemed to uplift her. Excitedly, she asked another question. Do you have any brothers or sisters? Avon's smile never faltered. I had a brother once. He tried to kill me, but failed. Venom started to enter his voice. The girl paled at Avon's response. After a few moments, her courage returned, and she posed another question. What did you do? She asked. Avon could tell she didn't really want to know the answer, but curiosity had overruled caution, which it often does with the very young or very foolish. Well, I killed him, of course, Avon said with a shrug. I tortured him for a while, taught him the true meaning of agony, and then allowed him to die. Avon was not surprised when the little girl walked away quickly from him. He was fine with that. The conversation had lost his interest. As the night wore on, Marwyn became drunk himself and began wandering around the banquet hall looking for something interesting. Not accustomed to being around a large gathering of people while he was intoxicated, Marwyn bumped into many of the guests, stepped on their toes, and made inappropriate compliments to elven women. Zarktis, seeing what was happening, left Alethian's side for a moment to deal with the artificer. Return to your room before you anger me, fool, Zarktis ordered. Marwyn smiled. Yes! Of course. I could use some rest. Good idea, Zarktis. Zarktis shoved him in the direction of the rooms. Now! He hissed. Marwyn was taken aback by the rough treatment, but obediently went to his room. Flopping down on the bed, he paid no attention to closing the door behind him. He just wanted to rest while he tried to figure out why Zarktis seemed so angry all the time. Marwyn had no idea how much time had passed when he was awakened by someone shaking him. He was no longer dizzy from his drinks, but he was still quite groggy from having his rest interrupted. "Human, wake up!" a woman ordered. Not expecting a female's voice, Marwyn wiped the drool off his face and looked around. The candle in his room was lit, and the door had been locked. The woman that had awoken him was the same elven woman that had shot at Avion earlier in the day. Marwyn was very confused, but highly intrigued. "Human, are you still drunk?" the woman asked. Marwyn nodded. "Little bit. Why are you in my room?" he asked. The woman shook her head and held up a hand. "You must listen to me, human. Do not interrupt. I want you to explain the situation to the Khorne warrior. I fear after our first encounter he will not listen to me." She looked determined. Marwyn blanched at her request. "You want me to give a message to Zarktis?" The woman nodded. Marwyn shook his head. "Let's be straight here, lady. My performance of late? Less than stellar," he said, trying to talk the woman out of her madness. The elven lady wouldn't be deterred. "If you can't get him to see reason, then you and your allies will be all killed tonight. I will not allow my daughter to marry that wisp of a boy." The look of disgust on her face as she said that gave Marwyn pause. "That Prince Pine Hightower has no business with my daughter, nor does that family need to be blended with mine." Marwyn got the feeling she was talking more to herself than to him. He sat cross-legged and waited for her to finish. Looking up and seeing Marwyn listening, the woman refocused. "Gather your friends and their belongings and be gone by dawn. Otherwise my house will have no choice but to kill you and all of the Hightowers," she said as she stood. Walking towards the door to the room, she unlocked it. Listening at the door for a moment, she looked back at Marwyn just before she left. "Remember, be gone from this place before the sun rises fully, or we will kill all of you." Without another word, the woman slipped out of the door as quiet as a shadow. Marwyn sat on his bed for a moment, going over what just happened. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew that it wasn't a joke. He also knew that the woman's threat had been real. He could feel some kind of heat radiating off of her. Definitely magical in nature. The memory caused a sick feeling to sit in the pit of his stomach. "I've got to find Zarktis," he said as he headed towards the door. Avon was bored. Many people have lost their lives when Avon felt this way. Fortunately, he wasn't in a mood for death. Making his way towards Alethian, he posed the question. "Lord Alethian, is there a temple or place of worship around here?" Alethian looked surprised. "Of course. Past the rooms, north side of the wood. You can't possibly miss it." With a practiced bow, Avon made his way there. It didn't take long for him to arrive in the sanctuary, and what he found there pleased him greatly. All the gods, young and old, benevolent and sinister, were worshipped here. Walking around the different gods' worshipping areas, he found one dedicated to Slaanesh. Stunned, almost beyond belief, he tapped a strapping male elf on the shoulder. The man turned to face Avon with a warm, beaming smile. "How may I assist you, sir?" Avon decided to go for broke. "I see this is a shrine dedicated to Slaanesh. How is such a thing possible?" The man's smile never wavered. "All the gods are worshipped here. This is one of the many wonders of the Archway forest," the man explained. Seeing Avon still seemed confused, the man continued. "The only way to ensure the forest remained a holy wood that would survive the test of time, the creators made sure to dedicate the forest to each of the gods, no matter how good or evil they might have been. In this way, all the gods had a vested interest in the wood and bestowed their protection upon it." He finished with a graceful bow. Lowering his voice, the elf threw in a little extra. "It is said that if the gods ever had to meet in neutral territory, they would meet under the boughs of these trees." Avon took in the information and nodded his understanding. His next question was dripping with purpose. As a worshipper of Slaanesh, then, would you know of somewhere a consenting adult could go for some true entertainment? A hungry smile spread across his face. The Slaanesh worshipper's smile got bigger. Of course! At the edge of the forest on the southeast side, the largest oak in the forest yields a secret entrance to the true entertainment. Please come and join us there at your leisure, he purred. Not wasting a moment, Avon made his way to the southeast. Avon was able to find the giant oak without issue. The great tree was covered in Slaanesh symbols, and a dozen elves were going inside when he arrived. Another young elf, that looked a lot like the worshipper he had spoken to at the shrine, met him at the tree. "How may I assist you, sir?" he asked. Avon showed the man his agony machine. "I'm looking for an individual to use to create some agony," he said conspiratorially. "Also, if there's some adult entertainment, I can take a part of that as well." The Slaanesh worshipper's eyes grew wide in excitement when he saw the apparatus Avon held. "Right this way, my friend. I'll go first," he said excitedly as he led Avon into the depths of the tree. Smiling happily, Avon followed the elf and spent the rest of the night discovering the pleasures of Slaanesh. With the night growing late and the ceremony the next afternoon, Alethian finally decided to call it a night. Zarktis kicked Goldtusk awake. He had passed out from drinking too much, which would have been fine, but Zarktis wanted someone he knew at his back. Goldtusk surprisingly was awake quickly and recovered his clothes and armor. "We go home now?" he asked as he dressed. Zarktis shook his head. "No, now we work." Together, the small group walked Alethian to his room. After a quick search of the room, Zarktis and Alethian shook hands and parted ways. Goldtusk went to his room a few doors down. Zarktis, feeling something strange in the air, deemed to stand guard outside Alethian's door. While nothing overtly aggressive had occurred, Zarktis couldn't shake the feeling something bad was going to happen soon. Never one to ignore his instincts, Zarktis stayed alert. A few hours later, Zarktis saw Marwyn going door to door, frantically searching. Some doors he knocked on, and some he simply kicked in, calling out Zarktis' name. Having enough of the artificer's bumbling, he would have killed him on the spot, had he not noticed the fear plainly growing on his face. "Marwyn, you fool! I'm right here! What's wrong?" Surprised, Marwyn looked in Zarktis' direction, and sprinted towards him. "Zarktis, where have you been? I have been looking for you for hours now." He almost sounded irritated. Zarktis growled. Marwyn heard the sound and gulped. Never mind. I'm sure you were busy," he said nervously. "Anyway, that elf woman that shot at Avon earlier, she came to my room and said if we don't leave before the sun fully rises, she's going to kill all of us." He was relieved to finally relay the message. Turning from Zarktis, Marwyn began heading towards the stable. "I'll go get the horses ready," he began when Zarktis grabbed him and halted his retreat. "Find Avon and send him to me now," Zarktis ordered as he shoved Marwyn away from him. "Goldtusk, to me now!" Zarktis bellowed, no longer caring if he disturbed anyone. Within moments, Goldtusk came bashing through the door to his room. Covered in debris from the door, he had his axe in his hands and looked ready to kill a giant. "Who you want me kill, human?" he asked eagerly. Zarktis didn't reply. Rounding on Alethian's doors, he began pounding his fist on the wood. "Alethian, wake up!" Zarktis said. The urgency in his voice would have moved a Slan. Within moments, the latches on the door began to click open, and a bleary-eyed Alethian stood before Zarktis. "What is wrong, my friend?" he asked, concerned. Zarktis relayed the message. Alethian's eyes grew wide with fear, and then narrowed in fury. "If that twisted beastman spawn of a woman lays a hand on my son, I'll kill her," he said as he grabbed his staff. "Follow me to Pine's room." Alethian sprinted down the hall without waiting for a reply. Without a word, Zarktis and Goldtusk ran after him. Meanwhile, not having a clue where Avon was supposed to be, Marwyn continued pounding on doors looking for him. No one that answered the door seemed happy to see him, but Marwyn was far happier to face their wrath than Zarktis's. Dedicated to his purpose, Marwyn continued his search. Zarktus and Goldtusk had a little trouble keeping up with the sprinting elf, but they never lost track of him. They caught up to him after running down a narrowing hallway made up of tightly packed together redwood trees. The door at the end of the hall was larger than the rest and heavily decorated. To look at it made Zarktus and Goldtusk slightly dizzy. Alethian produced a tiny silver key from around his neck and thrust it into the lock. The door opened on silent hinges into a room full of incredibly well-made and fancy elven furniture. A quick search of the room showed it was empty. Alethian brought them to the kitchen area and waved his hand over the wall. The wood of the wall folded in on itself and revealed a horde of dryads standing in formation, perfectly still, between the group and a peacefully sleeping Prince Pine. Goldtusk was about to walk in amongst the dryads when Alethian stopped him. "Do not cross the line," he warned while pointing at a line of salt across the ground. Goldtusk squinted at the salt and then nodded at Alethian. "Me kill plants?" he asked hopefully. Alethian cracked a grin. "No, Orc. The plants are on our side." Zarktus was about to ask a question when a woman's voice stopped him. From the hallway outside the room, Lady Blower delivered an ultimatum. "I see the human failed to convince you of my sincerity, Paladin," she taunted. Zarktus said nothing. Silently he chastised himself for allowing her to corner him so easily. Lady Blower continued. "Do not think of me as the evil one in this, Zarktus. I am not—" It made Zarktus furious to know the woman was enjoying this. To prove this, I will keep my word. The sun has not risen yet. Leave now, and leave elf business to the elves. Not only will I pay you double what Alethian owes you, but you will leave here whole and unscathed." Zarktus heard the woman's words, but the blood boiling in his veins could not be quenched by gold earned by surrender. "What say you, Zarktus?" Lady Blower asked teasingly. Zarktus growled loudly. He wanted nothing more than to charge into the hallway and slaughter the prissy bitch elf. The warrior inside of him knew to do so would mean certain death, and Khorne bestowed no glory for pointless suicide. Goldtusk responded. "Come and take elf if you can, bitch!" Smiling savagely, Goldtusk nodded proudly at Zarktus. In response, a dozen arrows sailed through the door and lodged into the wall. Immediately, the group noticed a green stain spread across the wall and began to dissolve the wood. In a few moments, the dissolved wood was dripping like candle wax onto a growing puddle on the floor. Frowning, Goldtusk spat. "Cowards use poison." Alethian seemed close to panic. "Lady Twig, why are you doing this? Why do you want to stop this marriage? What do you plan to do with my son?" he asked desperately. Lady Twig Blower's tittering laughter flowed over them. "No Hightower will ever lay with a Blower. I don't care what the gods have decreed," she said musically. "Alethian, order the dryads out to fight them!" Alethian shook his head. "The magic binding them doesn't work like that." "What do I plan to do to your son? Kill him, of course, thus ending this foolishness forever." Laughing loudly, all three of the allies could clearly hear the madness in her voice. Fury took control of Alethian as he walked in front of the door, completely exposing himself. Zarktus was about to grab him when he saw the elf was casting a powerful spell. He knew better than to disturb a mage in the middle of a spell. Horrible, nightmarish things occur when a wizard fumbles when using magic. A dozen more green-tipped arrows came flying into the room. Each was aimed at Alethian's heart. A magical shield deflected every arrow, with only one leaving a tear in his robes. As Alethian was completing his spell, he stretched both arms out towards the elves in the hallway. As he uttered the final syllable that would unleash the spell upon them, a single magical bolt slammed in Alethian's stomach, causing him to fumble the spell. The last thing Zarktus saw before hands came out of the ground and began clawing at him was Alethian speaking two words. "Oh, gods!" Dozens of arms burst out of the walls and from the floor, all around the allies. Goldtusk was able to fight them off largely thanks to his flaring war paint. Zarktus and Alethian were not as lucky. Alethian's robes were shredded by the hands, and his flesh beneath scratched ragged. Blood flowed from dozens of wounds as the arms began dragging him down into the floor. Zarktis fared little better as the hands brought him down to his knees and tore at his face. He fought with all of his fury and won his freedom, but the spell took its toll on him. His face poured blood from a deep gash that ran across his forehead. The blood stung his eyes and made it hard for him to think. His body was shredded and his armor heavily damaged. As he stumbled away from the hands, only his pride kept him on his feet. Wiping the blood away from his eyes, he peered through the haze to check on his allies. Goldtusk seemed fine and was almost enjoying himself. Alethian was screaming as the hands dragging him down began digging into his exposed belly and clawing at his entrails. With a primal roar, Zarktis threw himself at the hands, bringing Alethian down, with the intent to save him. He was inches away from him when a sudden intense heat blasted him from the direction of the hallway. A massive fireball exploded into the room. It hit Alethian directly and disintegrated the elf where he laid, ending his agony. Zarktis, who was only grazed by the initial impact, was blasted across the room where he hit the wall hard and slumped to the ground. If there was any life left in him, Goldtusk couldn't tell. For his part, Goldtusk was able to dive into the room with the dryads and dodged much of the blast, only getting slightly singed by the blast wave. Taking cover behind the wall of the dryad room, Goldtusk waited. He knew the elf woman would enter the room to check on her work and to get to the prince. Once she was inside the room, he would charge out and kill the elf and everyone else in this gork-forsaken forest for good measure. The heat from the fireball quickly dissipated, and Goldtusk listened hard for the sounds of the elves coming inside. He heard nothing. Not until Lady Twigblower began to speak again. "Oh dear, I think I've killed your friends, Orc," she giggled. Goldtusk snarled but said nothing. "Do not think this is my fault, foolish greenskin. I tried to let you and your friend leave. I have no quarrel with you. I just wanted the Hightowers dead." Still Goldtusk said nothing. Lady Blower sighed. "I don't know why I bother. The orc is clearly too stupid to understand civility. Gods, kill him." She almost sounded bored. With a rage that could only be born from an orc, Goldtusk leapt to his feet and charged into the room. Wading through a hail of arrows, Goldtusk pushed through and cut down 3 of the archers in the first few seconds of the fight. Riddled with arrows, Goldtusk didn't slow at all as he continued hewing through elven archers until only a paltry 4 archers stood between him and Lady Blower. Goldtusk roared a challenge at the woman. Lady Blower smiled, raised up her right hand, and pointed her palm open at him. With a single word of power, another fireball slammed into Goldtusk's chest. The resulting blast killed the remaining 4 archers in the room. However, the eyes in the goblin's skull Goldtusk wore around his neck glowed with the same intensity that his war paint did when the protective magic of his gods was activated. Grinning, Goldtusk gave his old goblin friend's skull a loving pat, charged through the flame, and dropped a shoulder into the elf, slamming her against the wall. Blood spurt from her mouth, and for good measure, Goldtusk punched her across the face, sending her flailing across the room. Planting both feet on the ground, Goldtusk roared his defiance at the prone elf. He was going to make her suffer before he killed her. This he swore to both Gork and Mork.
You in my house, motherfucker!
Lady Blower came to rest about 20 feet from where he had hit her, and for a moment, Goldtusk thought he may have accidentally killed her. He saw her move slightly, though, and roared another challenge to her. "Get up and fight!" he demanded. The sound of a glass bottle bouncing off the floor filled the room as Lady Twigblower stood before him. Her wounds were gone, and she smiled as she drew a massive greatsword from her pack. Goldtusk was momentarily confused. He couldn't figure out how such a large weapon fit in such a small container. An odd scent in the air carried the answer. "Elf sorcery! Bah!" he said, disgusted. Lady Blower spun her elegant greatsword in perfect circles and then held her hand out, motioning for Goldtusk to come towards her. "So you think you're a hero, Orc? Come at me then. Discover how wrong you are." Gold Tusk needed no further goading. Gold Tusk brought his great axe down as hard as he could, planning to split the elf in half. No longer did he wish anything more than for this irritating elf to be dead at his feet. He would eat her liver before he left her here, or die in the attempt. Lady Blower parried the blow, but Gold Tusk was an accomplished fighter and was able to headbutt her in the face, smashing her nose into ruin. Lady Twigblower was not an inexperienced fighter either. Instead of stumbling from the pain, she used the momentum from Gold Tusk's blow to spin around lightning quick and carve a chunk of flesh out of his belly. Blood flowed like a river from the wound, and Gold Tusk howled in pain. Lunging at the smirking elf, Gold Tusk rained down blow after blow against her, unable to land anything other than a glancing blow or two. Her defense was as amazing as it was frustrating. "You're slowing, Orc," she said, amused. Gold Tusk said nothing. He knew she was right. He was exhausted. There were at least 8 arrows sticking out of his body. Half the meat of his stomach was cut away, and the power of the Wog had fled from him. For the first time in his life, Gold Tusk realized he might die. The thought renewed his strength for one final desperate attack. Kicking out at her, Gold Tusk was not surprised when she easily spun away from him. He had expected it. Rearing back, Gold Tusk threw his axe with all of his remaining strength at his foe. His axe flew true, but just as it looked like the blade would sink into Lady Twigblower's skull, she saw the weapon coming and was able to dodge out of the way. The handle of the axe did strike her in the head, however, splitting the skin and spilling her blood down her face. Hurt, but far from defeated, Lady Leafblower stood straight and saluted Gold Tusk. "You fought very well for a savage. May our gods greet you with honor," she said. Gold Tusk, already on his knees, held his hands to his stomach, trying to stop the flow of blood. He had never felt so weak, nor so tired. He heard the elf woman say something, but her words sounded garbled. He wanted so desperately to go to sleep. He couldn't even remember what he was supposed to be doing. Lady Twigblower walked over to Gold Tusk's kneeling form, and without ceremony, brought her greatsword down on his head, splitting the orc completely in half. Meanwhile, Marwyn was getting desperate. He had been searching for Aebon for a while now, and other than 3 fistfights and 4 lengthy investigations into elves he had been sure were hiding something, he was no closer to finding him than when he started. Rounding a corner, he found himself staring down the shafts of a dozen elven archers. Raising up his hands in surrender, Marwyn paled. Do you know where Aebon is?" He could think of nothing else to say. Lady Twigblower approached him. She was bloodier than the last time he saw her, but she was smiling happily. "You really are useless, aren't you, human?" Shrugging, Marwyn nodded. "I suppose so." Laughing, Lady Twigblower waved a hand. "See to it he is returned to his horses and is gone before the sun rises." Marwyn dared to speak. "What about my friends?" Lady Blower didn't bother looking back. "You will meet up with those that remain outside the forest. Good journey, stupid man!" Without resisting, Marwyn allowed the archers to escort him back to his horse, and then back to the grasslands the party had first met Lady Blower at. Waiting for him there was Zarktus's form. He was slumped over his warhorse. Marwyn checked the paladin for signs of life, and found he was still alive. He was just unconscious, and had an amazing-looking scar that ran across his face. Usually a scar that large would make an individual hideous, but the way the scar ran across Zarktus's face, it made him look far more dashing and dangerous. Marwyn was sure that when his friend woke up, he would be very proud of his new scar. Peeking around a tree, Squeaky approached Marwyn. "Master, dead," he said excitedly. "Elf bitch not notice Squeaky. Me go with you? Yes, yes?" Marwyn smiled down at the Skaven. "Of course you can come with us," he said happily. The way Marwyn saw it, the more friends he had, the better. Pointing at Zarktus's face, Marwyn pointed at him excitedly. "Have you seen Zarktus's new scar? It's amazing!" The two spent the rest of their time waiting for Aebon and Gold Tusk by examining Zarktus's face. Aebon was shaken awake by the male elf he had met before entering the tree. His night had been spent making agony and dispersing it amongst the elves partaking in the festivities of the tree. In the end, he was only able to make a few extra doses of his drug, but considering the amount of fun he had had that night, it was well worth the cost. "Go away and let me rest, boy," Aban yarned. The look of urgency on the man's face cleared the fog of his mind. It is time for you to leave, Aban. Gathering his possessions, Aban left the sanctuary of the oak. As he stepped outside, he found himself surrounded by over 30 high elf archers. Completely taken by surprise, Aban couldn't hide his irritation. He couldn't imagine what his fool allies had done to get him into this kind of trouble. Lady Twigblower approached him from amidst the throng. Sighing, Aban prepared himself for death. Dark Elf! Lady Blower barked at Aban. You will leave this forest now and never return. Understood? Her tone left nothing to the imagination. Not willing to tempt fate, Aban simply agreed. Lady Blower turned her nose at him and left in a huff. Aban was then quickly escorted to his horse, and then to the plains, where he saw Marwyn, Zarktus, and Squeaky waiting for him. Of Gold Tusk there was no sign. Upon arriving, Aban noticed that Zarktus was hunched over his horse and seemed to be grinding his teeth. Marwyn and Squeaky shared Marwyn's horse. Aban carefully worded his next question. Where is Gold Tusk? He asked. Zarktus answered. He's dead. As he spoke, Aban noticed a new scar freshly healed on his face. Nodding his understanding, Aban said nothing else. Silently, the remaining allies made their way back to Prague. Not one of them looked back. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed this third installment of my D&D 3.5 Warhammer narrative report. Man, what a way to end on a sad note, huh? With Gold Tusk's death like that, but just a series of unfortunate events with everything happening. The party splitting up, the Dwellers Below spell Alethian was casting misfiring and landing on the party instead of the enemy. it was a lot of unexpected things. It was like that perfect storm of disaster. But there were a lot of highs and lows, a lot of laughing, a lot of frustration, a lot of fun. Bottom line was everything that a D&D match should be. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope, as always, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, feel free to put them in the comment section below. Feel free to lament about Gold Tusk's death. God knows I expect it, and I might actually be a little upset if there isn't any. But I hope you guys, if you have any kind of, character names, scenarios, challenges, fan art, pictures, anything at all that you want to see in Tremendous's Tall Tales in a future scenario, or just any ideas you might have that you want to see the party face or deal with or anything like that, feel free to throw them in the comment section. If they're good, I'll try to incorporate them. If they're not, thanks anyway. But yeah. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for me. I'm tired because I've been talking for the past 2 hours, so I'm going to call it here. But yeah, guys, thanks.